A billionaire father used to thinking money could solve every problem, until a black waitress in a humble diner did something no doctor or specialist ever could. She reached out, smiled warmly, and let his disabled son take the lead in a dance, right there, in the middle of the restaurant. In that simple moment, everything changed. He realized he'd been rich in money, but bankrupt in love. Richard Whitmore had everything money could buy. His name was etched onto glass towers in Manhattan, whispered in Forbes meetings, and printed on Fortune 500 covers. He was the man behind billion-dollar mergers, luxury resorts, and global tech investments. From the outside, his life was flawless: tailored suits, private jets, and gala invitations that could change a career overnight. But inside, his world was rigid, sterile, and heartbreakingly lonely. He lived by the numbers: profit margins, quarterly growth, investment returns. Love, empathy, and patience weren't currencies he traded in. Even in his luxurious penthouse with its panoramic views of New York City, there was a coldness that couldn't be masked by Italian marble or automated lighting. That coldness followed him everywhere, even into his role as a father. Richard's only son, Liam, was born with cerebral palsy. A beautiful boy with brilliant green eyes and a gentle soul, Liam had a condition that made movement difficult and speech sometimes delayed. For Richard, this wasn't a challenge, it was a problem. And problems, in his world, had solutions. He didn't see Liam's condition as a part of who he was, but rather as something that needed fixing. He poured money into therapies: physical, occupational, speech. The best clinics. The most expensive specialists. Custom-built equipment. If a treatment existed anywhere in the world, Richard made sure Liam had access to it. But amid all this effort to treat the symptoms, he overlooked the heart of the child behind them. Liam didn't ask for more therapists. He didn't want more machines. What he craved was connection. A father who sat on the floor and played trains. A dad who let him try, even if it meant falling. But Richard couldn't allow space for imperfection. His schedule was precise, his expectations high, and emotions were seen as distractions. He offered Liam the world, but not himself. Nannies came and went. Caregivers rotated weekly. Liam's mother had left years earlier, unable to live in the shadow of Richard's empire. So the boy grew up surrounded by people paid to care, but never truly loved in the way he deserved. He smiled often, quietly. He learned not to cry when Richard missed another school play or forgot a birthday. He learned how to be invisible in his father's world, because trying to be seen only brought disappointment. Even when they spent time together, it wasn't real. Richard would sit in on therapy sessions with his phone in hand, nodding absent-mindedly while reviewing contracts. He celebrated progress like milestones on a spreadsheet. 3% more hand strength this month. Good job, son. But he didn't see the way Liam looked at him when he managed to zip his own jacket. He didn't notice the joy that filled his son's eyes when he managed to take 3 steps on his own. What mattered to Liam was not the numbers. It was being seen. There was love in Richard, buried deep beneath layers of ambition and armor. He wasn't a cruel man, just a man who'd forgotten what truly mattered. He thought giving his son access to the best was enough. He never realized that all Liam ever wanted was something no amount of money could buy: a father's time, a father's warmth, a father's pride. People whispered behind Richard's back. Poor boy. So much money, and yet, they didn't finish the sentence. They didn't need to. Everyone could see it. A child surrounded by abundance, yet starved of affection. And a father too busy looking at the horizon to notice the miracle right beside him. This was the world they lived in, one ruled by control and outcomes, where feelings were inconvenient and stillness was unacceptable. Richard didn't know how to slow down. He didn't know how to play. He didn't know how to just be there. Until one day, far away from the noise of boardrooms and city lights, something shifted. Something unexpected. Something small and quiet and entirely ordinary on the surface, but beneath it, something profound. The kind of moment that cracks a man's armor and lets the light in. But that moment hadn't come yet. Not while Richard still believed he was doing everything right. Not while he measured love in dollars and progress in charts. Not while he failed to see that the little boy he called his son wasn't broken or behind, but simply different. Beautifully, courageously different. And so, the billionaire father and his disabled son continued on, one clinging to perfection, the other just longing for presence. Two hearts beating under the same roof, yet worlds apart. But change was coming. Not from another therapist. Not from a revolutionary new device. Not from any of the high-end solutions Richard had come to rely on. It would come from the most unexpected place. A small-town diner. A kind-hearted waitress. And a single moment of music that would rewrite everything Richard believed about success, strength, and what it really means to love. The turning point began far from the skyscrapers of Manhattan, in a quiet town that didn't know or care who Richard Whitmore was. It was supposed to be a routine stop, just a brief pause on their road trip to a private pediatric clinic a few states away. Richard didn't even remember the name of the town. What he did remember was the look of the diner, modest, a little weather-worn, with a crooked sign and the smell of fresh coffee wafting through the parking lot. He almost didn't stop. But Liam needed a break. And for once, Richard wasn't checking his watch. Inside the diner, the air was warm, the walls lined with faded photos and mismatched booths. There was no concierge, no polished marble, no hushed voices like the restaurants Richard usually frequented. Just laughter. The kind of laughter that floats gently, not loud or forced, just honest. For a boy like Liam, who often felt like an outsider in polished spaces, this place was different. And that's when she noticed him. Her name was Maya. She was a waitress, young, black, with gentle eyes and a voice that felt like sunlight. She didn't look at Liam with pity, the way others did. She didn't rush to speak over him or glance nervously at his walker. She knelt slightly, smiled, and addressed him directly. "Hey there, big guy. You like pancakes?" That was all it took. Liam's eyes lit up. He nodded, shy but smiling, and Richard noticed it. The way his son responded to her, not with hesitation, not with fear, but with joy. Real joy. The kind Richard hadn't seen in a long time. Maya treated Liam like he belonged. She brought crayons and coloring sheets without being asked. She joked with him, listened to his careful words, and when she brought the food, she placed it in front of Liam first, asking him if everything looked okay. Small things. But to Liam, they meant everything. And then, something unexpected happened. Music began playing from the small jukebox in the corner, an old soul track with a soft rhythm. Maya smiled and swayed her hips lightly as she refilled coffee cups. Liam watched her, entranced. His fingers tapped along to the beat, and his foot twitched in rhythm. Richard didn't notice at first. He was on his phone, scanning emails. But when Maya walked past again and caught Liam's eyes lighting up, she stopped. "You like this song?" she asked. Liam nodded eagerly. "Well then," she said softly, "why don't you show me your best dance move?" There was a pause. A long one. Richard looked up, alarmed, instinctively protective. But Maya waited, patient, open, encouraging. Liam looked at his feet. Then at Maya. Slowly, he pushed his walker back slightly, placed one hand on the edge of the table, and raised the other in the air, mimicking the way Maya had moved. He shuffled one foot, then another, an unsteady, gentle motion that barely passed for dancing by most standards. But Maya didn't see that. She gasped dramatically, clapped her hands, and spun in place, matching his move with joy and celebration. And just like that, the two of them were dancing, one leading with slow, deliberate effort, the other following with grace and pure delight. Richard was frozen. For the first time, he wasn't calculating. He wasn't correcting. He wasn't trying to improve the moment or optimize the outcome. He was just watching. And in that silence, he saw what he had been missing all along. Liam didn't need $1 million clinic or another expert telling him how to be better. He needed someone who saw him for who he was, who celebrated his effort, not just his results. Someone who didn't wait for perfection to acknowledge his worth. In those few minutes, Maya had given Liam something Richard hadn't, the freedom to be proud of himself. The dignity to try without fear of falling. The chance to feel like the hero of his own story, not the subject of someone else's treatment plan. That moment, so small, so human, cracked something inside Richard. For years, he had fought to shape Liam into the version of normal the world demanded. But maybe Liam wasn't broken. Maybe the world was. Maya had seen that. She hadn't been trained in developmental therapy or pediatric psychology. She didn't carry a clipboard or charge $600 an hour. But in under 10 minutes, she had done more for Liam's spirit than all the professionals combined. And suddenly, Richard realized, this wasn't just about his son. It was about himself. He had spent his life chasing legacy, believing that greatness came from building, scaling, achieving. But true greatness, it turned out, came from showing up. From listening. From dancing when the music played. Something shifted that day. It didn't explode. It softened. Like a door creaking open in a long-closed room. Richard had come into that diner with a timeline, a plan, a destination. He left with something far more valuable. A beginning. The days after that brief encounter at the diner were marked by an unfamiliar sense of stillness inside Richard. For a man used to boardrooms, flight schedules, and a calendar filled months in advance, the quiet reflection that followed was both unsettling and liberating. He found himself thinking about Maya more often than he expected. Not in the way he thought about employees or acquaintances, but in the way someone thinks about a mirror they didn't know they needed. She had reflected something back to him that he hadn't dared to see. He returned to his routines. He made calls. He attended meetings. He reviewed contracts. But behind the polished exterior, something was shifting. The world he had built, opulent, efficient, untouchable, now felt hollow in places he had never noticed before. It wasn't that he regretted his success. But for the first time, he questioned what it had cost him to build it. Liam, too, was different. He smiled more freely, and there was a lightness in the way he moved around the house. He no longer needed permission to dance to music in the kitchen or hum to himself during meals. And Richard, instead of stopping him, started joining in, clumsily at first, but then with a kind of humble eagerness that surprised even him. It was as if Liam had been waiting for his father not to lead, but simply to follow. There was a particular evening when Liam asked about Maya, his voice soft but hopeful. Richard had already thought about that. He didn't know much about her. No last name. No contact information. Just a first name and the memory of her laughter echoing over the clatter of dishes. But it didn't sit right with him to let someone like that fade into the background of his life story. People like Maya didn't show up by accident. She had entered their lives like a whisper, but left a mark like thunder. Richard decided to return to the town. Not out of obligation or curiosity, but because he felt he owed something. Not just to Maya, but to himself. He wanted to say thank you. And more than that, he wanted to understand how someone with so little by society standards could give so much with just her presence. It was something money couldn't buy and status couldn't replicate. When he finally found her again, she was exactly the same, still working shifts at the diner, still moving with purpose, still flashing that same radiant smile. But this time, he didn't see her as just a kind woman who had treated his son well. He saw her as someone carrying wisdom, resilience, and grace that the world often overlooked. As they talked, Richard began to learn pieces of her story. Maya had grown up in that town, raised by her grandmother after her parents passed when she was young. She had dreamed once of being a dancer, but life had other plans. Bills came before ballet. Family came before ambition. And yet, she never spoke with bitterness. Only a quiet conviction that joy could still be found, even if dreams had to take a different shape. Richard listened, not just with his ears, but with the part of his heart that had long been dormant. He realized Maya hadn't simply danced with his son. She had extended dignity, beauty, and belief to a boy the world too often looked past. And she did it not for praise or recognition, but because that was who she was. That understanding changed Richard. In the weeks that followed, he began making small changes in his life. At home, he spent more time being present, with Liam not around him. At work, he began questioning the culture he had created. Was it one that valued people, or only performance? And most significantly, he started putting his wealth to a different kind of use. Quietly, without press releases or photo ops, he funded community programs focused on accessibility, inclusion, and the arts, especially for children with disabilities. One of the first grants he issued was to a dance studio in Maya's town, outfitted with adaptive equipment and open enrollment for kids of all abilities. It bore no corporate logo, no sign of his name, only a plaque at the entrance that read, "Everyone deserves to dance." It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was meaningful. Richard had come to understand that change doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it begins in a diner booth, with a waitress who sees the child in a wheelchair not as fragile, but as capable. Sometimes it begins with music and ends with healing. And sometimes, it begins when someone like Richard, successful, powerful, but lost in ways no one could see, finally learns how to be human again. The dance Liam started was still going, and it was leading his father somewhere new. Months passed, and the transformation that had quietly taken root in Richard's life began to blossom in ways that even he couldn't have anticipated. What started as a single dance in a modest diner had become the spark that rewired his understanding of fulfillment, purpose, and legacy. No longer was his world measured solely in profits or acquisitions. It was now framed by the moments that couldn't be bought, the ones that asked him to show up, to feel, to connect. His relationship with Liam flourished into something deeper than responsibility. They were no longer just father and son living parallel lives under the same roof. They had become companions in a shared journey of rediscovery. Richard made time every day to talk with Liam, not just about school or therapy, but about whatever was on his son's heart. Sometimes it was music. Sometimes it was dinosaurs. Sometimes it was simply silence, but even that felt like progress. There was no longer a sense of rushing through moments. Every laugh, every gesture, every shared glance mattered. One of the biggest changes came when Richard made a decision that startled his entire board of directors. He stepped back from the day-to-day operations of his company. For a man whose identity had been so tied to his role, it was a bold move. But Richard no longer saw leadership as a title to defend. It was now a platform to empower others. He placed a trusted colleague in charge, someone he knew would carry on the company's values with integrity and compassion. And with his schedule finally his own, he focused more fully on causes that had meaning. The adaptive dance program he had helped fund in Maya's town began to thrive. What started as a modest studio soon became a community hub, where children of all backgrounds and abilities came together to move, create, and express themselves. Maya, though initially hesitant, accepted the offer to teach part-time. Her natural way with children, her kindness, and her quiet strength made her not just a teacher, but a mentor. Richard insisted she take the lead in shaping the vision for the space. He trusted her instincts. After all, it was her act of kindness that had inspired it all. The bond between Richard and Maya also grew. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't romantic in the conventional sense. It was founded on mutual respect, gratitude, and a shared understanding of the human experience. They came from vastly different worlds, but somehow they spoke the same language when it came to what really mattered. Dignity, compassion, courage. They challenged each other to think more deeply, to love more freely, and to live more intentionally. Richard also began using his resources to amplify stories like Maya's, stories that rarely made headlines but deserved to be told. He created a small foundation that highlighted individuals creating impact at the grassroots level. Not celebrities. Not billionaires. Just everyday heroes doing extraordinary things. The foundation didn't just write checks, it gave voice to the unseen, the underestimated, and the overlooked. Liam continued dancing. He was never the fastest or the most coordinated, but he was always the most joyful. His confidence bloomed. And as he twirled and moved and laughed, he inspired others, children and adults alike, to see that ability was not about perfection but participation. He had become a symbol of what was possible when one person chooses to believe in another. Richard began to recognize something else too, how much he had misunderstood the power of connection. He had once believed that influence came from the top down. That success trickled. That change had to be large-scale to matter. But Maya had shown him that the most transformative acts are often the smallest. One dance, one moment of eye contact, one refusal to look away. He had come to believe that love, in its purest form, was not about rescue or reward, but about recognition. The man who once avoided public vulnerability now openly talked about his journey. Not in interviews or speeches, but in conversations with other parents, other business leaders, other people who, like him, had gotten lost in the pursuit of the wrong things. He didn't claim to have answers, but he had a story, and that story was opening doors for others to reflect on their own. He no longer saw his wealth as something to shield or boast about. It was simply a tool, one that could either build walls or open windows. He chose the windows. He chose the view of a world more inclusive, more compassionate, more whole. By the time Liam performed his first recital at the Adaptive Dance Studio, arms outstretched, eyes shining, movement steady and sure, Richard sat in the audience with tears in his eyes. Not from sadness, not from pride alone, but from the realization that healing often begins when we least expect it. That it can come not from strategy or effort, but from surrender. The billionaire who once measured his worth by numbers on a screen had learned the immeasurable value of presence. All because one black waitress chose to see his son, not as a burden, but as a boy with rhythm in his bones and magic in his heart. And with that simple act, she had taught a man how to live again. Thank you for watching this incredible journey of transformation, hope, and the power of human connection. It's a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change lives forever, not just for one person, but for everyone around them. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories that celebrate courage, compassion, and unexpected friendships. Remember, no matter who you are or where you come from, we all have the power to make a difference. So never underestimate the impact of a single step, whether on the dance floor or in life. Until next time, keep believing in the magic of kindness.